As Stanley walked along, he came across two doors. Since he wanted to proceed to the store and buy this absolutely fantastic game filled with branching narratives, a fancy narrator, and lots of funny jokes, he went through the door on his left. Stanley obviously made a mistake because he wanted to go to the store in order to buy this cheap and incredibly enjoyable game, so he went through the door on his left. Stanley never liked his job as an office worker. He always wanted to leave. He always wanted to go and pick up that copy of the Stanley Parable and play through it until the end of his days. So he went through the door on his left to leave the building and go and buy a copy of the Stanley Parable. No. Okay, clearly I'm not making the choice good enough. Alright, let's start from the beginning while I come up with a better choice for you. As Stanley walked, he came across two doors, which left him with a choice. Either he could proceed to the left and buy this absolutely fantastic game called the Stanley Parable, or he could proceed through the right and listen to some awkward, annoying Australian talk about it for about 20 minutes. Yeah, that's what I figured. Roll the intro. Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, and I want to talk to you for a bit about the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe, which is a re-implementation of the paid version of a free mod, both of which are about 8 years old at this point. It's kind of ridiculous. But I loved the original mod, I loved the paid version of the Stanley Parable, and now that Ultra Deluxe is out, I'm happy to inform you that that hasn't changed. The reason why I'm telling you this right up front instead of waiting for the end of the video that I usually do is because I believe that the Stanley Parable is something that's best experienced knowing absolutely nothing about it whatsoever, although that does come with the caveat that you actually play a fair amount of video games, or at least know a lot about video games, because a lot of the jokes, gags, and what have you in the game are based around sort of video gamey humor. So if you know that though, and you're willing to accept the fact that this is more of an experience than it is a proper game with challenge or other sorts of things along those lines, I would wholeheartedly recommend you go buy this right now. And I will continue not talking about the game with full spoilers until we get through this weird thing that pops up every time you launch the game. It does go somewhere. Everything in this game goes somewhere. But I just figured I'd give you that one last opportunity to leave. So, yeah. Last chance until I start talking about the game in depth. Alright, I warned you, we're on to full spoilers now, because the Stanley Parable, trying to talk about it just results in spoiling everything special about it, so I'm just gonna kind of give up about it and just tell you what it's about. It's a choose-your-own-adventure game with a walking simulator skin. That is the absolute, base level of what it is gameplay-wise. It never gets much more complicated than look at something and click on it to interact with it. And if you're the sort of person who needs challenge, who needs variety, who needs just actual, not so much actual gameplay, but just something to do that isn't walking around and clicking on things, you will hate the Stanley Parable, and you're probably the only person I would recommend not try the Stanley Parable. There are also a lot of jokes in here that are kind of relevant to the state of the video game industry, and honestly, they feel surprisingly more relevant than ever, despite the fact that most of what the game is trying to say is based around the 2014 game era age. So God, we've only gotten worse from here, haven't we? But look, the basic idea of the Stanley Parable, before we get into what Ultra Deluxe adds, because that's a whole other can of worms. The basic idea is that it is a game where there's a story, but it's paper thin, and you make choices along the way, and these choices can completely change the way that the game ends. And it can be anything as simple as walking to freedom, to nuking yourself, to doing something along the lines of jumping out of a window and finding a sort of meta discussion on map design in video games. But the thing that the Stanley Parable manages to get down pat is that sense of discovery. Because when you get that first ending, and then you modify just one change that you make, one choice that you make, I should say, it becomes a completely different ending, and therefore makes you wonder, okay, what the bloody hell is next? Where is the rest of... what is the rest of the endings going to be? And every time you head down a new ending and end up in a completely different situation, you always end up having a lot of fun with it. You always end up listening to the narrator and finding yourself thinking, okay, this is ridiculous, I can't wait to see what's next. And that is the absolute best part of the Stanley Parable. Just walking around the next corner, finding something completely different, and knowing that you're probably going to enjoy it just as much as you did the rest of it. Then, on top of that, you've got plenty of other things going for the game as well. The main thing being the game's narrator. Because, good God, this guy was absolutely brilliant back in the Stanley Parable's free and original paid versions. And here he's even better. His voice is fantastic, his deliveries are excellent, and the writing is just... mwah, chef's kiss. It does such a good job in not only giving the narrator a bit of character, which again thoroughly changes with whatever ending you're going down, giving this guy... well, I mean, I guess he could also have borderline personality disorder along with just being an interesting guy, but he's always interesting. He creates a character. He always has these weird interactions with you as the player. And if you do a bunch of different things, like constantly go in and out of certain locations or do certain things over and over again, he'll comment on them. And it ends up feeling like this sort of 2-bit character drama between the narrator and you, the player character, i.e. Stanley. And it just creates this really interesting atmosphere where you've just got the two of these guys bouncing back and forth off of each other while going down these absolutely crazy story paths, and it just creates a really neat experience. Something, and I say this not lightly in the slightest, something unlike anything else I've played in a game before. It does a really good job in just being entirely unique, and I'm thoroughly impressed with the way it goes about things. And of course, there's a lot of different endings, they go in a lot of different directions, and it also helps that this new PC version here is actually based off the Unity engine and not the Source engine. They basically had to rebuild it from the ground up. And as a result, the game actually runs pretty well. There's a couple of gags that come up, though, where if it's trying to load a sound in, it'll stutter. And this usually comes up when it's trying to pretend that it's doing an endless loop of audio. So it kind of ruins the gag when that shows up, which is a little bit of a shame. But 99% of the time it runs absolutely fine. I haven't had a problem with it on my computer. And I imagine that it will run on not so much anything, but anything made in like the last 5 years will probably be fine with it. You can just explore it at your own pace, more or less. And of course, the game absolutely loves to screw with you. Whether it be through doing some weird infinite audio stuff, or just very slightly changing the way that the levels are laid out, or dropping something on you out of nowhere just for the hell of it. It loves pulling that sort of trick, and every time that it does, I love watching it. I think it's great. And on top of that, you've also got the Ultra Deluxe content, which it basically just turns around and becomes this absolutely, it just becomes this absolutely massive meta joke about itself. Because I get the feeling that they had the Metal Gear Solid 2 disease, where the Stanley Parable was incredibly well received, and they were asked constantly, like, how do you improve on the Stanley Parable? What's next for the Stanley Parable? And as a result, they ended up making this hour-long, single-ending, massive meta commentary on the Stanley Parable, on memories of a game gone by, on what they wanted to do. But, of course, they wrapped it in a ridiculous amount of jokes, great writing, and just over-the-top silliness that makes it work really well. And I can't help but think, yeah, that's what they were thinking. They were just having a problem trying to follow up with their magnum opus, and so they just made jokes about it. But being someone who can kind of understand where they're coming from, it works. It works so well in this particular case. And it still has that brand of the Stanley Parable humor. It still has that touch, that little bit of salt, that makes it feel like a natural extension to the original Stanley Parable, while at the same time having came out after the Stanley Parable, and so they're able to look back on it. Even going to the point of going and featuring actual negative Steam reviews of the original game. And so I went there as soon as I saw that review. I'm like, this is real, isn't it? This is absolutely real. This is the sort of thing they would absolutely... Yep, it's real. And there were so many people who beat me to the punch on that one because I was a couple of days behind on actually playing the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe. And it also adds like a couple of things that, again, are entirely over the top, but are also just entirely on point. Because you've got all the original endings for the Stanley Parable, right? There's like 8 endings. And then when you unlock the bucket as part of the presentation, I'll try not to spoil everything, but when you unlock the bucket and you pick up the bucket, it changes all of the other endings to be relevant to the bucket, whether it be just by changing what the narrator says, or to the point where the ending in which you visit the museum that has all of the stuff about the game and the way they went about building it and sort of things they cut during development and what have you, gets changed completely to being a museum about the bucket. And it's ridiculous. It's genuinely ridiculous, and it must have taken so much time and effort to rewrite every single ending to just include this fucking bucket. But it shows a commitment to their joke. It shows a commitment to their concepts, and all of the endings still work even with the bucket. Even when they add a couple of new ones specifically for the bucket, it all still works. And it's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. It's ridiculous. It's hilarious. It gives you so many more ways to play the game. And it's just more Stanley Parable. And the Stanley Parable is excellent. And so as a result, the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe is Ultra Deluxe excellent. And it still remains my favorite example of this kind of thing. Whether it be like a choose-your-own-adventure game, whether it be a walking simulator, or whether it be something just trying to make you laugh. Because at least when it comes to me, I find myself having a very hard time laughing at video games that aren't something like visual novels, because the writing is never that good. That's my phone going off, because of course it is. But I laughed so much at this. The ways that it caught me off guard. The ways that you can get endings. How they've even added like a couple of just regular endings that are even harder to find than normal. They even embrace the fact that you can glitch down to the bottom of the what was it called? The mind control room. That's it. The fact that they just took that, turned it into an actual ending just for this version of the game. Again, it just shows commitment to the joke. And I love it. It's so good. And I'm incredibly disappointed that I've gone talking about it for, 13 minutes at this point? Because I've spoiled a lot of the discovery. I've spoiled a lot of the surprise. But I still think this game is excellent. So, yeah. I think I'll shut up now, because I've said all I want to say. The remake's engine is great. It doesn't break too much, although it kind of does, unfortunately, when you've got a couple of gags that get lost in the process. The writing is excellent. The narrator is wonderful. The multiple endings are all over the place, but always leave you with this sense of discovery. And it just creates this atmosphere, this tone, and this sense of exploration that is incredibly hard to find in modern day video games.
Is that correct?
And of course, this game is like 8 years old at this point, so there's no surprise in that whatsoever. But look, I absolutely love the Stanley Parable, and I love Ultra Deluxe as a result. And of course, they have added a ridiculous amount of new stuff. Like the even if it was just like the 1 hour thing on its own, full of its own gags and self-referential punches and whatnot, I'd be fine with that. But the fact that they reformatted the majority of the endings to work with this bloody bucket that you carry around is just, it's so much effort. And it all fits. It's all so well done. And all I can say is bravo. Great job. Feel free to, I don't know whether or not they want to let it die or they want to continue making the Stanley Parable, but either way, you guys do whatever the bloody hell you want. Although, I guess that's a positive, isn't it? They spend so much time talking about whether or not they want to let the Stanley Parable lie or they want to continue pumping out sequels, and it's never made entirely clear exactly what they want, even when you get to the game's epilogue, but I don't know. For a game like the Stanley Parable, the entire point is to leave you guessing. And good job, you've done that too. With that said, this has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all next time.
Be our destination, even if there's no story there. Or to put it another way, is the story of no destination still a story? Simply by the act of moving forward, are we implying a journey such that a destination is inevitably conjured into being via the very manifestation of the nature of life itself? Okay, Stanley, I need to follow this train of thought for a minute. Just stick with me. Now, we can both agree that the nature of existence is in fact a byproduct of one's subjective experience of that existence, right? Okay. Now, if my experience of your existence rests inside of your subjective experience of this office, is this office, in fact, the skeleton of my own relative experiential mental subjective construct? Whoa. Hang on. That got a bit weird back there. Well, I'd like to apologize. Not sure where I was going with all that. You know what? I think what we need right now is a bit of music to lighten the mood. Cut the music, go back and look at that fern. Stanley, this fern will be very important later in the story. Make sure you study it closely and remember it carefully. You won't want to miss anything. Wait, what? We're back at the office? No. Line, you do know we're looking for the Stanley Parable, right? The story? Is any of this ringing a bell? Oh, no, not again. Line, how could you have done this to us? And after we trusted you, after everything we've been through, you... Oh, I can't take this anymore. To hell with it. Restart. You know what, Stanley? I say forget the adventure line. What's it ever done for us? We're intelligent people, right? Why can't we make up our own story? Something exciting, daring, mysterious. Ooh, this all sounds perfectly doable. Why don't we simply start wandering in, well, I don't know. How about this direction? Now, yes, this is exciting. Just me and Stanley forging a new path, a new story. Well, it could be anything. What do you want our story to be? Go wild. Use your imagination. Whatever it might be, Stanley, I'm ready for it. Oh, no, not you again. Stanley, I'd also like to veto the line from having any role in our awesome new story. No lines or monitor rooms. Just don't acknowledge it, and we should be fine. Ah, a choice. We get to make a decision. From here, the story is in our control. How important we mustn't squander the opportunity. In fact, I believe I need a minute to think here. Just walk in circles for a minute. Okay, so I know that each door has to lead somewhere, which means that somewhere at the place where we're trying to go, there must be a reverse door that leads here. And that in turn means that our destination corresponds with the counter-inverted reverse door's origin. So starting from the right, let us ask, will taking the right door lead us to where we're going? And since the answer is clearly yes, then by all accounts, the door on the right is the correct one. Another victory for logic. Come, Stanley, our destiny awaits. Oh, hold up, what's this? The confusion ending. You're telling me that's what this is? It's all one giant ending? And we're supposed to restart the game, what, eight times? That's really how all this goes? It's all determined? So now, according to the schedule, I restart again. Then what? Am I just supposed to forget? Well, what if I don't want to forget? My mind goes blank simply because it's written here on this thing, wall. Well, who consulted me? Why don't I get to decide? Why don't I get a say in all of this? Is it really? No, it can't be. I don't want it to be. I don't want the game to keep restarting. I don't want to forget what's going on. I don't want to be trapped like this. I won't restart the game. I won't do it. I won't do it. I won't do it. And the timer stopped? Does that mean, did we do it? Did we break the cycle? The, whatever it is that made this schedule? How would we even know? Will someone come for us? Will something happen? So, okay. I guess now we just wait, you know. I suppose in some way that this is a kind of story, wouldn't you agree? I'm not quite sure if we're in the destination or the journey, though they're always saying that life is about the journey and not the destination, so I hope that's where we are right now. We'll find out, won't we? Eventually. Well, in the meantime, if you... End is never the end, 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 is